Hello and welcome to this Breeders' Cup 2020 rundown. I'm Matt Bisogno and this is ggs.co.uk. The Breeders' Cup this year is run in Keeneland, Kentucky. There are 5 races on Friday, Juvenile night, all 5 races are for 2-year-olds, and 9 races on Saturday night, including the headline, the Classic. The dirt track is just over a mile around, and the inner turf track, which runs inside the dirt track, is less than a mile. It's around 7.5 furlongs around, so very tight bends, think Chester, but without the cutaway. The ground, the weather's been dry, the ground is scheduled to be on the firm side, probably equivalent of British good to firm. The first race of the weekend is a Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint. Run over 5.5 furlongs on the grass. It was an undercard race in 2017 when the Euros went 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 of them running from the very far back of the field. But since then, in the 2 actual Breeders' Cup renewals of this race, the US have taken the 1, 2, 3 in 2018 and the first 4 home last year. So the Euros are up against it. The first 2 years as a Breeders' Cup race, 2018 and 2019, both winners won gate to wire, and both winners came in unbeaten in 1 and 2 prior starts, and both winners had won minor graded stakes on their most recent run, listed with Bulletin, and a grade 3 for 4-wheel drive last year. 2 wide drawn horses, Dirty Dangle and 2nd of July, come into the race unbeaten and won in listed and grade 3 company last time, but they're not fast starters. Dirty Dangle can be prominent, but 2nd of July missed it last time and came with a late run. Here there's plenty of pace, including in the widest draw of all, Golden Pal, who ran such a great race at Royal Ascot and followed that up in the ungraded Skidmore Stakes at Saratoga. He's the favourite, but he's drawn in 14, which is going to make life difficult. This is a very tricky race, and in truth I'd rather bet something each way at a price, and the one that I like is the fast starting 1 from 1 5.5 furlong horse, Bodenheimer. He's drawn 10, which isn't a gimme, especially if Into the Sunrise just on his outside breaks smartly. Golden Pal also is wider of him, and there's speed inside as well, so an alert beginning is a must. If he gets a clean break and gets to the bend near the front, I think he'll give us a great run for our money at around 9-1 each way. The second race on Friday is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, and this is a right match-up between Europe and the USA. We bring some high-class horses across. The USA, as usual, have their best 2-year-olds. It's a really, really open race. It's possibly the most competitive race of the entire weekend, and it's not a race in which to be bullish. The trends suggest the competitive nature of the race, and if we look on the right hand side at the pace figures, 4 being led, 3 prominent, 2 midfield and 1 held up, there's not a lot of obvious pace in the race. A couple of horses, Abiko and Gretzky the Great, might go forward, so too might Devil Walla, but really this doesn't look a race overloaded with pace, and what that means is that on this tight inner turf track with a full field of 14, there could be any amount of hard luck stories in the straight. This really is not a race to be going all in with. It's not a race I like at all. I've backed Mutasabek anti-post. He ran a cracking race in the Bourbon, which is a key US prep, but that day he got a really fast pace to run at and gunned them down in the straight. Abata wasn't far behind that day, and he too, if they went hard here, would be an interesting finisher at a big price. But this race probably doesn't set up for them. One of the horses that interests me at a reasonable price, and I do want to bet something at a double figure price here because of the nature of the race, is Go Atletico, the French horse trained by Philippe Decouze and ridden by I'm not going to say his name right, Amérion Lemaitre. He's drawn 12 He's tactically versatile. He's got a nice fit for this. He has to prove he stays a mile, but he's got a real turn of pace. He's beaten Seal away twice in the 2 times they've met, and that form looks solid. He's about a 12 or 14 to 1 chance. I think you can get 5 places with one firm, and really this is a race where you want to get as many extra places as you can. It's very competitive. There'd be very few surprise winners of the race. I will chance Go Atletico each way for small money. Race 3 on Friday is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, over a mile and half a furlong on the dirt, and it's a small field this year. Just 7 runners go to post. It's small, but it's a classy field, as usual in the race, in fairness, and it looks like a top of the market kind of race to me. There are 3 in here with, I think, credentials that are well above the rest. They are Simply Ravishing, Day Out of the Office, and Princess Noor. Now, the last named, Princess Noor, is trained by Bob Baffert and brings the West Coast form to the table. She's run slow races. She's won well, but she's run slowly, and the question is whether, I've got a slight reservation about there might be some speed figure inflation on the East Coast. The numbers seem to be generally higher there than they are at Del Mar and Santa Anita. So we'll see about that. But she ostensibly has run pretty slowly so far. She's drawn 7. I don't think in a field of this size that should be too much of an encumbrance. But more of an issue is that she's got to run against some very fast fillies. Day Out of the Office put up the fastest number in the race when she beat Vequist last time, and I couldn't discount Vequist either. I think probably at the prices, if there were 3 places, Vequist would be an each way bet, but this is a 7 runner field, so you're only getting 2. I'm going win only, and I'm going to take the chance with the top speed figure, which is Day Out of the Office. She's a very fast filly, and I think she's probably got what it takes to get it done here. The penultimate Friday race is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf, run over a mile on the grass. This has been a great race for the US, in spite of Europe sending some really good fillies to it. One interesting side note is that the 2 years when Europeans won were the 2 years when Lasix was banned in the juvenile races at the Breeders' Cup. This year at the Breeders' Cup, all of the 2-year-old races have got Lasix off. Lasix is a diuretic that basically helps horses not to bleed, essentially. Anyway, they'll all be running without the medication this year, so whether that has a factor and improves the chances of Europe, I'm not sure, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. Of the US winners, 8 of them ran in either the Miss Grillo or Natalma stakes. Those are the key preps by a mile for this race, and some of the runners fit that preparation. Chad Brown has won an unbelievable 5 of the 12 Juvenile Fillies Turf to date, and 4 of the last 6. Now, he didn't win it last year, and he's represented only by 1 this year, and she's quite a big price, editor at large. She ran 3rd in the Miss Grillo, that key prep last time, but she was, although it was a steadily run race and she was closing towards the finish, she was never really looking like catching Plum Alley. Plum Alley is about the 2nd favourite here. She won the Miss Grillo, and I think she's got a real good chance of doubling up here. She's about 6 to 1, and that's an attractive price to me. She might be 3rd favourite actually. The speed horses are the 2 favourites, and they are Aunt Pearl, who's 2 from 2 so far, and Campanelli, who won at Royal Ascot and then the Prix Morny in France. But her winning form, Campanelli's, has been over 5 and 6 furlongs, and this is a mile. It's a 2-turn mile, so they don't go too fast, because every time they get the speed revved up, they hit a turn, and that slows them down a bit, or at least tempers the tempo. So she has got a chance to get the trip. I remember being against Hootenanny of Wesley's, who was a similar sprinter stretching out around 2 turns. I couldn't have him for any money, and he of course won. So I I can't confidently discount Campanelli, but I certainly don't want to back her at about 7-2. Aunt Pearl, I think, depending on whether she can lead with Campanelli in the field, she will offer a bold sight from the front. And again, she's not much of a price at 3-1, but she's probably a legitimate favourite all the same. The one I want to be with, I think, is Plum Alley. I think that form from the Miss Grillo is strong. We have to trust the history of that race as a queen maker for the Juvenile Phillies turf. A couple at prices of interest. Miss Amulet, Ken Condon's runner, will be probably close to the pace early, has quite a progressive profile and is an each way price. And I can't overlook Chad's runner, Editor at Large. She's drawn 14, but she's a late runner anyway. And if the two fancied horses, Campanelli and Aunt Pearl, do lock up on the front, then she could be running late, and she might be able to step forward on what she's shown so far in a different race setup. She certainly ought not to be 18 or 20-1, and I very much doubt she'll be anything like that price on the US Nanny Goat. So ultimately, I'm going to side here with Plum Alley and the Miss Grillo form. And we close on Friday at a very civilised 10:10 in the evening UK time with the Breeders' Cup Juvenile over a mile and a teeny, as they say. There's a full field of 14 scheduled to face the starter, and Steve Asmussen's Jackie's Warrior is a strong favourite. He's a horse that's been electric at the gate, and he does all his good work in the early part of the race before hanging on somewhat in the latter part. The problem he's got here is that there are a good number of pace horses against him, notably Dreamer's Disease, Classier, and potentially Likeable as well, and maybe Next also. If those horses do lock up on the front, and there must be a good chance that they will, then that's going to find out any non-stayers in the race. Jackie's Warrior, with that early speed and hanging on late on, I'm just not convinced that he'll get home. If he does, he'll be a very good horse, and there's a good chance that he is a very good horse. But you're being asked to take 6-4 and 7-4 that's the case. That isn't a price that I want to bet in a setup like this. And in actual fact, I'm going to play a couple of closers, later runners, against the speed. If I'm right that the speed locks up, then something may come from further back, something slower may come from further back and run just a more efficient race. And the two I like are Dale Roman's Sitting on Go and Mike McCarthy's Rombauer. They're both drawn fairly wide, but given the nature of the race, with all that speed in it, they should be able to relax into a position and come late if they're good enough. They're 10-1 and 20-1 respectively, each way with as many places as you can get, and hopefully we'll get something to cheer in the straight when the speed wilts. And that's Friday's card. It's a tea time start on Saturday for the 9 races that comprise the main Breeders' Cup card. We start just after 5 o'clock with the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, a 7-furlong sprint where they often go too hard and shocks have been aplenty. That's the route into a bet potentially, with 4 very fast fillies in here. Gamine has led in pretty much all her recent starts, so too Serengeti Empress, so too Venetian Harbour, and also on a couple of occasions in the midst of Biz. Serengeti Empress and Gamine are the 2 top favourites, and if they do lock up early, then they're going to be struggling in the last furlong potentially. If they're not struggling, they're very, very good, and there is a chance, of course, that that's the case. But this is a race that very often changes complexion late in the play, and I'm after a closer. The 2 that I like in that context are Speech from the inside. She should get a good trip, just stalk in her own time the pace and come through late if she's good enough. And at a massive price, Sally's Curling. Now, she was 15 lengths off the leader at the second call in a grade 3 2 starts back, and she ended up coming through late. The feature of that race was a ferocious pace up front. They went too hard. They were running on vapours at the end, and she came through. there's a very good chance, in fairness, that she's simply not up to this level. But she's a 25 to 1, 33 to 1 chance, and in that context, she's worth a really small chance. Speech Inside is about 16 play, and one that I can't get my head away from is In the Midst of Biz. This TCA and synthetic form, the Thoroughbred Club of America Stakes, it's not a major race in the US calendar, but the winner of this race has come out of that race on a number of occasions, and she won it this year. Prior to that, she'd had a spin on the synthetic track, and switching surfaces from synth to dirt is another feature of long shot winners of this race. Now, I wouldn't want her to be getting involved in the speed, but if she could sit handy off that, she might get first run at the tiring horses. Again, she's a big price. She's 33 to 1, and I'd rather take split. Easy for me to say. I'd rather split a very small stake between Speech, In the Midst of Biz, and Sally's Kerning than take on either of Gamine or Serengeti Empress at the prices. It's a race that'll be fun to watch and could change dramatically late in the day. The Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint is the next race on the card, and it's not a race I've got much of a handle on. The only two things that I would observe is that front end speed is a positive, and trainer Peter Miller, has won this race the last 3 years, and he had a 1-2 in the race in both 2017 and 2019. He runs Texas Wedge, who's got a pretty moderate draw in 13 and a mid-div run style, so he'll need a lot to go right for him, even though the trainer is greatly respected in this context. Of the early speed horses, Big Ranua, which is presumably a typo, comes out of stall 1, has led in his last 2 races, and has a very impressive 4 from 5 record over 5.5 furlongs. He's going to get every chance to lead and go the shortest route from the inside. He's about 16 to 1 chance, and in a race where I haven't really got a clue, I'd take a bit of a flyer with him. Again, small change. The Dirt Mile is an interesting race. It's one of the newer ones, and it tends to be, it's a bit like our Ryanair, if you like, at the Cheltenham Festival. It's where horses who are not quite fast enough for the sprint and not quite strong enough stamina for the classic end up running. In fairness, it is a legitimate race, and it often produces a very legitimate winner. This year's field is hard to decipher. Complexity looks a legitimate favourite, although stall 10 in a race where there might be an amount of front end speed is not ideal. It's not a race I'm probably going to bet. If I do get drawn into a bet, I might play for tiny money Hazel's Team in stall 11. I think he's quite good. He doesn't win very often, but he's actually he's been second or third in Grade 1 races, and he's got a bit of class about him, and he's got a price about him, and that's enough in a race like this. Next up is the Filly Mare Turf, an interesting race in which in the last 8 years it's been Europe 4, Chad Brown 4, and Chad actually runs 4 this year. He runs Sister Charlie, My Sister Nat, Rushing Fall, and Nay Lady Nay. And of the quartet, I'd probably give the best chance to the one that the market also gives the best chance to, Rushing Fall. She's drawn 6, she's tactically versatile, and she comes into this race off the back of 3 straight wins, the last 2 of them in Grade 1 company. One thing to keep in mind about the race this year, this Filly Mare Turf race, it's an intermediate distance, and the distance fluctuates from year to year. Normally it's run at 10 or 11 furlongs. This year it's run at a shorter trip of 9.5, so miler stretching out may be the play rather than 10 or 12 furlong horses cutting back. Of the Euros, I'm kind of drawn to John Gosden's Terrabellum. I respect obviously anything that Gosden runs in America. He used to train on the West Coast. He knows the style of racing very well. He knows the right horses to bring over, and Terabellum, who although ostensibly not having the best European form, she's got quite a good profile fit for this race, and she's fairly tactically versatile as well. So at the prices, and she might be a bigger price on the US tote than the 10-1 you can get here. She is an interesting each way play again, and if you can get extra places, then you really ought to avail of that as an insurance policy. The Breeders' Cup Sprint is next. It's run over 6 furlongs on the main dirt track, and a feature of the race historically has been that horses have run 100 plus by a speed figure. Now, if you look in the second right column, you can see that there's a lot of red there. This is a race this year where essentially a lot of the horses haven't run fast enough against historical pars. Now, one of the things to always keep in mind when the horses haven't run quite fast enough is that sometimes a shock can occur because they're all much of a muchness, and something can step forward. Vekoma, who has this 110 this season, is a non-runner, spiked to temperature apparently. So Lasting Legacy, the also eligible number 15, draws into the race. Of the rest of them, it's a difficult race to pull apart. Yopon is the favourite, looks to have the best of the speed, early speed, and in a race that actually for a sprint race there isn't a huge amount of early tow, so he might get to the lead and be tough to pass. He's only run 4 times in his life. He's a 3-year-old. He's won all 4. And he should make a bold bid to make it 5 out of 5. I think he's got a really good chance to do that, actually. He's run a 101, which isn't a massive speed figure in the general context, but in the context of this race, it's one of the better ones. And obviously, after just 4 career starts, he's got a good bit more upside than plenty of these. Others to consider are Peter Miller, the Sprint King's CZ Rocket, or as they say over here, CZ Rocket. He's drawn 2. He's been on a winning spree. I just don't really like the way he finishes out his races. He obviously he can win. Any horse can win, but at the prices, he looks a bit short to me. 2 of the older stages are Firenze Fire and Diamond Oops. Both of them come into the race in reasonable form. Both of them have disappointed at the meeting previously, and while that's not a curse, it's something that I find hard to get out of my head. Whitmore has lost many more than most of these, but he's always competitive on the big stage. He's having his 4th go at this race, having finished 2nd and 3rd in the last 2. He's about a 16-1 shot, and he's as hardy as they come. He might be an interesting underneath play if you're doing exotic bets. And Frank's Roquette is a filly. She's on a great run of wins. 6 furlongs is her trip, which is why she comes here rather than in the 7 furlong filly and mare sprint. She's also adds interesting spice to the race, although she's not a bet for me. The one I like, unimaginative as it is Yopon, the favourite. The mile. The Breeders' Cup Mile, 1 mile on the turf. Feels like it should be a Euro benefit, with the Brits and the Irish serving up year to year. But in actual fact, apart from Expert Eye a few years back, Britain and Ireland haven't had a winner of this race since 1994. They had 75 beaten horses in that time. Sorry, 74. They're 1 from 75 in that time. Since 1995, I'll correct myself. Ridgewood Pearl was the one before that. So there'd been a lot of fancied UK and Irish horses beaten in this race. The French have a pretty good record. Goldie Cover was a big factor in that, winning 3. But the US have a really strong record in the race, and they obviously are well represented again, if somewhat overlooked in the main by the UK bookmakers. That's good news. A front runner has never won this race in all of the runnings of it, and there are 3 in here. You can see the red numbers in the pace score column that look like they'll go forward. Factor This and Halliday are perennial pace pressers, drawn wide enough but should get across. And Circus Maximus in trap 1 is an Aidan O'Brien runner. Now, the problem with Aidan runners is that they tend to break very slowly, and in a race like this, Circus Maximus could find himself locked up in about 8th place on the rail with nowhere to go. If he breaks alertly, he can stalk and he'd be quite interesting, but recent history has suggested that those Aidan runners, they're just not quick enough at the gate to get properly competitive in races of a mile or less. So, if those are the ones that I don't like, who do I like? Well, with the pace from Halliday and Factor this expected, I think it could set up for a later runner. And a couple that I like in that context are Chad Brown's Digital Age. He's drawn 5. He's Grade 1 winner this year. He's in good form, and he's about 10 to 1. And I like the ex-Argentinian, Brazilian-bred Ivar, drawn 11. Tactically versatile, really good form. He's got a great kick, a great turn of pace, and I think he's probably a fair bet. Although this is a super competitive race, again, Chad's well represented. He's got Uni, last year's winner, and also Raging Bull in the outside draw. It's a very competitive race. Lots of horses with chances. Lopey Fernandez is another one. He's a horse who's been running over shorter, but he's got a turn of pace, and it just wouldn't surprise me if he ran a big race at a massive price. I don't really want to be with Kamiko, who's been winning. His wins this year have been over a straight 8, a straight mile. This is a 2-turn mile, and I just can't see him getting into top gear, and he could get stuck in traffic from that inside draw as well. If you agree with me about him, that makes the market for anything else you want to bet. And the one I would chance over all the others is Ivar, the Brazilian-bred ex-Argentinian horse. But Digital Age is also interesting in a very open race. Shortly before 9 o'clock, and we have the Breeders' Cup Distaff over 9 furlongs on the dirt, once carelessly called the Ladies' Classic. This is an interesting race, and on the betting, ostensibly it's a match-up between the reigning champion, Monomoy Girl, drawn in the outside, stall 10, and the 3-year-old sensation Swiss Skydiver, drawn in 5. Now, Swiss Skydiver has run 9 times this year, and she ran 2 at the end of last year as well, so she's basically been on the go for over a year solid. She's run incredibly consistently in that time, most recently winning the Preakness Stakes, normally the second leg of the Triple Crown, but this year, in this weird COVID year, the final leg of the Triple Crown, where she beat the boys. I thought that day she couldn't win because she'd had such a hard season, but she was so tough getting back up to prevail there. I'm going to say the same thing here. She's just had one more hard race in the locker there, and as amazing as she's been, and as fantastic as it would be to see her win again, I just think she's been to the bar once too often, and she might be staggering home on this occasion. Monomoy Girl, it's not a great draw in 10, but she doesn't need to be on the lead, so she can find a position in a race that's not got bundles of speed in it. I think she's a pretty solid bet to win again, for all that she's a fairly tight price at around 7 to 4. She will take a lot of beating. For those who want to bet each way, the one that might be interesting in that context is Ollie's Candy. 5-year-old now, danced a lot of dances, high class form, been second in 3 Grade 1s this year. She might be second in a 4th here. But it looks like Monomoy Girl to me, and I kind of want to be against Swiss Skydiver as much as I love her and what she's done this year. 2 to go, and they're the big 2. At 9:30, we've got the Breeders' Cup Turf, a race that's been a Euro benefit largely, although the US have done pretty well themselves. On a personal level, betting this has been an absolute horror show. I have picked the wrong European runner more times than I've had hot breakfasts. Europe is again really well represented, with Magical, who ran so close to enabling that memorable renewal of the turf in 2018. Tarnawa, Dermot Weld's unbeaten in 2020 filly, and Mogul, the Aidan O'Brien runner who won in France very well last time. We've also got Lord North, whose form I'm not quite sure about, but again, the Gosden factor means you discount him at your peril. And the interesting German runner, Donjar, who has a turn of pace, but probably isn't quite up to these. The American contingent look a little bit weak this year. The likes of Arklow and Channel Maker and Red King have been knocking around for centuries, it seems, and while they duff up plenty of the domestics on a regular basis and cash up the coin in the process, they won't have met a field as deep as this for, well, probably ever. This looks between the Euros. It looks between Magical, Tanawa and Mogul, and I'm really not sure which way to turn. I did back Tanawa each way. I did back Tanawa anti-post a little while back, and I'm happy with the price, obviously, because she's got here. I backed plenty of others who haven't made it, so I wouldn't say my anti-post portfolio has been astonishing. But Tanawa is one in my corner. I've kind of gone off her a little bit. I think this is a lot steeper company than she's been facing. I do like Magical. I don't like. I want to be against Aiden typically at this meeting, just because of the slow starts and the trouble in running and all the rest of it. But I think Magical looks a legit favourite, and she has to go close, surely. Mogul, I was unsure about him earlier in the season. There was a lot of chat about him. He's been very short for various races in which he got beat, but it was a really good effort in France last time. He did get the run up the rail, and he might need to get a split here, although he'll be coming late and can go wide. But he quickened really well, and that was an impressive performance. And I think he's kind of the coming man. He's the 3-year-old in a field of older horses. He's got more progression to come. He's quite lightly raced for an Aiden horse, and he'd be the one I fear. I think Aiden has a really, really good chance to win this. Though, of course, from a punting perspective, I'm hoping that his fellow countryman Dermot Weld beats him to the punch with Tanawa. I don't know which way to turn punting wise. I won't even put up a token, but what I would say is it ought to be a Euro trifecta, and it could be a Euro superfecta, and I'd be struggling to chuck in one of the Americans, even in the 4th spot. If I was going to do that, it'd probably be United, the West Coast guy, who's been 1-2 in almost all of his races. And so, at a little before 10:15, well before kicking out time in a normal year, we come to the 9th and final race of Saturday night, the headline $6 million Breeders' Cup Classic over 10 furlongs on the dirt track. It looks a great race in prospect. 3-year-olds against the older horses. The Bob Baffert West Coast Battalion against the Midwest and East Coasters, and it really is a cracking schmozzle in prospect. An interesting feature of the draw is that the Baffert trio of Improbable, Authentic and Maximum Security pulled the outside 3 posts, 8, 9 and 10. Authentic probably wants to go on. He's led in his last 3 races, and he'll be hooking up from stall 9 with Global Campaign in stall 7. Possibly Tacitus from the inside stall, but I don't think he's quick enough to go with the other 2. This could be quite fast early, and as is always the case with the Classic, a 10 furlong race on the dirt, there are plenty who won't see the trip out. I think Authentic is probably going to be one of those, just because I don't think he's going to get a freebie on the front early. The one I really like is Improbable for Bob. He's won 3 grade 1s on the spin. He's tactically versatile. He sat last of 5 last time behind Maximum Security and cruised by them in the straight. That was 9 furlongs. He's won over 10, so there are no real reservations about his stamina. Yes, he's the favourite, but I think he's a strong favourite, a legitimate favourite, and I think he'll take quite a lot of beating. Of the other 2 at the top of the market, I'm not sure about Tis the Law's form. That Travers win, which at the time looked so impressive. Looks fairly weak form now. Nothing has really come out and franked that since. And getting beat by Swiss Skydiver last time, when coming to win the race, franked him as either a weak finisher or a non-stayer, and neither of those things are what you want for this battle. So I'd be against Tiz the Law. Maximum Security is a notorious horse. He was disqualified, the first horse to be disqualified when winning the winning in inverted commas the Kentucky Derby last year in the mud. And this year he won the big valuable race in Saudi Arabia before getting disqualified for that for a drug offence. He's since changed stables from the disgraced Jason Service to the Bob Baffert barn. The Bob Baffert barn that's currently under 4 or 5 different investigations for drug offences. But his form has just flattened out a little bit. He obviously has back class. He's a very, very talented guy. But between him and Improbable, I'd definitely take Improbable. I think he's quite a legitimate favourite here. I think he'll travel round in his own time, not too far off the speed, and I think he'll pick them up and go by them in the straight. And he's pretty much nap material, so Improbable to win the Classic and round out a great night with a few quid in the tank. This is Matt Bisogno saying thank you for watching and listening. Good luck with your Breeders' Cup weekend wagers, and bye for now.